Welcome to Maintainable, the podcast where we explore the art, and sometimes the mess, of software that lasts. We speak with seasoned practitioners who have navigated technical debt, untangled legacy code, and helped teams build sustainable and resilient systems. Because good software isn't just about shipping fast, it's about making it last. I'm your host, Robby Russell. Don MacKinnon, welcome to Maintainable.
Thank you for having me on.
So given your experience in the industry, what do you believe are a few common characteristics of, dare I say, well-maintained software?
Oh, great. So my biggest point of well-maintainable software, the attribute I look for the most is probably software that avoids unnecessarily being complex or overly abstracted. And part of the origin of how I've kind of refined my thoughts around that over the time is I read this book a while back by this professor at Stanford. His name is John Ousterhout. He has a whole book on the philosophy of software design. And that book really resonated with me. It kind of encapsulated all of the thoughts I had up to that point, but kind of distilled it down into a really compact medium to go through that. So, I mean, what is complexity? That's anything that kind of relates to the structure that makes it difficult to kind of understand and modify a piece of software, right? So the more you have to keep knowledge in your head to understand a system, the more difficult it is to maintain that software. And you can kind of see that when you bring new people onto the team, and it takes them an extraordinarily long time to get up to speed on a piece of software. They should be able to just read through the code and get a good understanding of what it does. So for me, good software, well-maintained software is software that does an elegant job of reducing complexity.
Do you think this is just a code readability, just in how, where's that fine line there? Because I feel like feels like that could be subjective based off of some people might be really talented. I'm air quoting talented, experienced software engineers, and they're very clever, and they can kind of take that mental model of their software that they build for their projects or their team, share that, and other people this is too abstracted. And how do you think about that?
When you get into building software, modularity is a big thing, but when you're choosing which pieces of the software to kind of group or encapsulate into modules, those modules themselves should be fairly deep. The interfaces should be simple, but there should be complexity within the modules themselves. And if you find you have abstractions where they're not really affecting the inputs and outputs that much, that it's highly likely that abstraction is unnecessary. And we can talk about that in a bit about this past project that I worked on, but you can still have good abstractions and that cleverness as long as that abstraction brings change and value to the software itself, I think.
And just for a quick note for our listeners, Don mentioned John Ouster's book. Was that a philosophy of software design, I believe?
That's right. It's a pretty short read, pretty easy read, very language agnostic. I brought that book to my team and we all kind of read it together. We do a monthly book club kind of thing
nice.
Where we'll read technical books together and then we talk about each chapter every week kind of thing till we get through the book.
Nice. And for our listeners, he was also, John was episode number 131 if you go back in the archives. I did not read the full book though, and I probably should pick that back up and maybe put that in my own book club thing. But had a really good conversation with him a couple of years back. I'm curious, Don, in particular, when you talk about what is actually, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the shape of the team you're currently working on right now. What does that look like and what's your role there at the moment?
So we're a startup. We're a developer tool startup. I'm at a company called Searchcraft. Our engineering team is roughly 11 people. So I'm kind of the lead architect and engineering manager and also, principal software engineer, all of that in one. But the rest of the team, we have a designer and a QA person, but the rest of the team are engineers as well.
It sounds like you're probably directly influencing the shape of the software product itself, hiring, recruiting people, mentoring, and helping guiding that. Out of curiosity, what inspired you to start working on this particular project?
I had no intentions of ever kind of going into building a developer tool, but we built this on the side, kind of on nights and weekends thing, back when I worked at a software consulting company. That was my previous company before this one. And we built a lot of applications for other startups or for enterprise organizations. So kind of companies of all sizes. And we noticed kind of one aspect of these projects that was kind of a pain point every time was search infrastructure and having the capability to hand that off to the people who are going to, in the long term, maintain these projects. Because a lot, as a consultant, we'd do the build out and then we'd kind of like transition it to like an in-house team typically. So search, because the nature of what was available on the market, it required highly specialized kind of training to really understand and maintain these systems. And we felt like there could be a better solution than what was out there. Something that was kind of less specialized training that any developer could kind of like get up and running very quickly within a few hours instead of like weeks or months to spin something up.
Interesting. So when you say it's a developer tool, is it a bit more than just like spinning up Elasticsearch or something? And is that even a comparable tool in that
Yeah,
space?
I mean, so Elastic is probably like one of our direct competitors, like a closest analogy to what we do them in Algolia. But yeah, so we decided from the very beginning with like as far as our stack choice went and our SDKs that we're building, that we wanted to reduce the complexity, right? So by reducing complexity, you can reduce the amount of time it takes to get up and running as a consumer of the system, but also like running the actual hardware itself, right? So if there's less configuration options for 90% of the use cases, then you don't have to maintain this gigantic Elastic cluster, right? So our requirements are much smaller.
What would be a typical use case for someone listening? Let's say if there's anyone listening out there working on a software project and they've got some search functionality they need to incorporate in their applications or their web apps or websites, what might be a useful edge case for them to consider looking at something like Searchcraft?
Well, I mean, if you're dealing with an application that has a fair amount of data that you need to be able to search through, and maybe the way in which the users want to search through it is not necessarily clearly defined. Like they need to be able to put in like phrases or ask things in a question, or, not necessarily be able to spell the thing correctly, or searching through multiple pieces of data. Like you could have multiple sources of information that you need to be able to search over, right? Pushing that information to a dedicated search cluster makes sense at that point.
That makes sense. And then is that when you're the SDKs, like, are there a lot of libraries for different programming languages already available for folks?
I mean, so we're pretty new. We just came out into beta this year. We've been building it for a while. The backend API has been solid for some time, but the front end SDKs, we currently have like vanilla JavaScript, React, Vue. We have a PHP client. We just rolled out a WordPress integration. So we have some more we're working on. We're going to work on a Ruby on Rails integration, a Laravel one.
Okay.
So
nice. Well, definitely include links to that in the show notes for people to check out. And are you folks hiring at the moment?
Not currently, but that may change at any point. So
Sure. All right. Well, again, and we'll include links to that in the show notes. But I just want to get a little bit of context for listeners as you're thinking about. I know that not everything in their conversation is going to be about what you're doing at Searchcraft, but like we're going to talk about some of your past projects as well. But just to provide some context for our listeners, I think where you are at in this point in time in your career. So I know that you've spent time maintaining and improving systems that were built with a lot of abstraction and complexity, which you talked about. Can you share a story, what that looked like, and how you might have approached simplifying it?
Yeah, so there was a Node.js API project at one point that I inherited from another developer, and there were some questionable choices about the abstraction on the data model layer. This is like textbook to what John was talking about in his book. There's a whole layer that wrapped any database interaction around Mongo. So in order to modify queries, or, you had to modify this abstraction, but it didn't actually change anything, right? It was just put in place. From what I understand, the idea was it was put in place to make it easier to swap out the database at some point down the road, which actually never happened. And there was no need for that, but it was put in place so it would hypothetically make that swap out easier. But at the end of the day, it really wouldn't, because the way the queries were constructed were very specific to Mongo anyway. All it really did was make it painful to use things like chainable methods for Mongo queries. So like if you wanted to use like a populate function to populate in a piece of related data from another Mongo collection, you would have to bolt that on to this abstraction, which didn't quite work that well. So it just made it really painful to develop. And plus your IDE, like traceability was not great either, because you're having to trace through multiple levels to get to where you actually need to make the change.
Hey listeners, it's Robby here. You know, it wasn't all that long ago I'd find myself debugging a weird issue in one of our clients' Rails app. I log into one platform to track down the error, only to realize it was tied to some performance issue. And guess what? That meant hopping over into a completely different tool and trying to match things up based off of timestamps, if I was lucky. And let me tell you, my productivity didn't exactly thank me for that. Enter AppSignal, our podcast sponsor, and the tool that eliminates all that back and forth. They bring error tracking, performance monitoring, host metrics, custom metrics, uptime monitoring, and logging into one seamless platform. It's a single source of truth that helps keep your app running like a well-rehearsed symphony. Whether you're working with Ruby, Elixir, Node, Python, or tracking front-end errors in JavaScript, AppSignal has your back. They're always adding support for more languages and frameworks too. And here's the best part. AppSignal won't break the bank. Plans start at just $23 US a month. Plus, they're ISO 27001 certified and fully GDPR and HIPAA compliant, so your data is safe. Oh, and because you're a loyal Maintainable listener, you can use the promo code Maintainable at checkout for 10% off your first year. So head over to appsignal.com. Tell them that your good friend Robby from Maintainable sent you and start making your app sing. Did you ever get to talk with them about what some of the original motivations were there? Or is that one of those types of inherited projects where just get the code repository handed over to you and you're like, all right, I got to make sense of this?
Yeah, I was kind of just handed over. I did talk with the developer a bit, but to be fair, it was kind of like they were primarily front-end developers, and this was like the first big back-end API project they worked on.
Sure.
So I got a little bit of slack on that, but
you got to learn somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Something I hadn't planned on bringing up with you, but you had mentioned that prior to what you're doing now at Searchcraft, you worked in the consulting space. So I'm curious, do you have a take on, had you worked at in product environments prior to the consulting company that you worked at, or out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, we built products. So the startups we worked for were like product companies. Like they were a lot of like consumer facing applications. And we were kind of like the technical team that executed on those products. But at the end of the day, we didn't have any direction over like the roadmap or anything.
And I'm just curious if, as a software developer that's worked in both of those environments, because I've been straddling this world of being in the consulting side for 20 something plus years now consistently. And some people are like, well, is the grass greener on one side or the other in terms of like, is it nice? Like, are you the type of, I feel like there's like different types of developers that excel in both of those environments, but maybe not necessarily enjoy both of them, because it's just very different types of environments of like, well, you're switching between clients and you want to see a lot of variety of things. And then, but maybe at a product company, maybe there's a theory that you can go a lot deeper into something specific for a while. Right. What's your take on that?
If I were to pick between the two, maybe it's because I'm in it now, I would pick owning the product myself versus building for others and consulting. And that's for a few different reasons. One, like you mentioned, we can go deep into something and spend some time on it really. And you have full decision-making capability on like stack choices, right? Like I want to build in this language. I want to use this database. Where sometimes with client work, you kind of get shoehorned into a technology choice that wasn't yours, which is never great unless it happens to align with what you enjoy working in already.
Yeah.
Also with the client work, you have to consider the capabilities of the people you hand off to eventually. Like, are they going to be able to maintain this? Do they have people on the team that understand this tech, right?
That's true. The reason I like to bring this topic up, and just for our listeners, is that, and they probably heard me talk about this in the past as well, is that when people will come to me asking for career advice, I'm like, well, I'm going to become a software engineer, and maybe they're a junior developer trying to get that first or second job, and they're thinking about like, I want to go work at a certain type of company. I asked them like, well, like, I don't know if it's better to recommend that they explore the consulting path if there's a job offer for, if they just had a job, let's say they had two job offers at the same time, would you recommend one over the other? Like, go work at a product company first or go work at a consulting company if they were going to make the same amount of money at either of those for some exposure or not?
I'd say that also depends on where you're at in your career, because there is a lot of value to doing client work in that you get the variety of projects you get to work on is much larger, and you get exposed to different methodologies of software architecture, as well as like different tech stacks as well. So you get to learn a lot over a shorter amount of time by doing the consulting, because you get just exposed to more, right? So I think if you're kind of starting out, like consulting is a great path because you're always working on something different. You're not solving the same problem every day, you know?
That's my kind of read on it, but I always wonder if I'm just too much in a bubble. So I feel very biased about this, but maybe I just would never be able to hack it in a real product company. I don't know. We'll never know, maybe. All right. Anyways, Don, so off my little tangent there. So thinking back to like these projects that you've come into and inherited where they're maybe overly complicated, what other types of challenges you've had to navigate with dealing with like legacy software and when you're kind of being responsible for working on those projects?
I think an evergreen kind of like issue is just learning context around why certain decisions were made in the code base. If you weren't there during that decision making process, you're kind of like having to infer it based on documentation or the code itself or whatever. And then like coming into a project, if maybe that project is relying on like community packages that haven't been maintained, and then you have to rewrite that functionality when you're making updates to the project. I've had that come up a bunch of times particularly like on React Native projects. It has been pretty painful. With React Native, you have to continually keep the core platform up to date to maintain compatibility with like Android and iOS updates. And so that would inevitably like longer because you'd run into like this community package hasn't been updated and they're no longer compatible with the core.
Interesting.
And maybe there isn't a drop-in replacement like for like this camera package or this notification package or whatever.
Do you feel like you've developed strong opinions about when it makes sense to bring in a third party or open source library into your project, given some of the experiences in the past?
Anything, it's like a balancing of trade-offs, right? So obviously it's better to own it yourself if you have time to build it and have a full understanding of that piece of functionality, because then it's on you to kind of maintain that and make sure it still functions. But sometimes that's not, especially with client consulting work, that's not always an option. Now you have to ship an MVP quickly in 3 months or whatever, then you're going to grab things off the shelf and then work that way. But it's a double-edged sword because you're depending now on this package that's out of your control. You can obviously there is some workarounds. You can try and patch things yourself, and I've done that. There's this like package out there that lets you like kind of write your own patches against community projects, and I've had to use that a few times when the community package was not updated.
I feel like I talked to someone about specifically within maybe the React Native space that there was some like patch at runtime patch things so you can kind of run and overload some things like that, which is, and I work in primarily like in the Ruby on Rails space quite a bit, and we there's a lot of forking and monkey patching and just like trying to figure out how to get things to work. And sometimes they can be really clever, but then also you inherit those projects, you don't always understand the context of why they needed it and if it's still necessary. So this can be a little bit of a mess to try to untangle at times as well. Do you think about when you're evaluating projects, are there signals? If you're looking at like say a GitHub repository for some package you might pull into your software project, what sort of things are you looking for to get to say, okay, I feel confident enough that we'll pull this into our project. We'll rely on this for now instead of building something ourselves. What are those some of the things that might indicate that, like, I feel like this might be a good, healthy decision for us now, knowing that that project could one day maybe be abandoned or, what have you?
Yeah, there's some pretty good standard like indicators to see if it's a good package to pull in. Some part of it is like adoption. So how many downloads is the package getting? If nobody's using it, then probably don't want to use it. How often does it get updated? Like, was it a one-time kind of Git push to GitHub and then forgotten, or is it actively being maintained? And then like you can go back and look through like the issue history, like are issues getting addressed or are they stacking up bugs in the backlog? And if people aren't engaged with the community, then it's typically an indicator that like maybe this package has been abandoned, right?
Yeah, I've always wondered, like, because I've talked to engineers over the years and seeing how they're like asking them to describe that process, and I think it's something like, was it still actively being worked on? But there are some types of projects where it's kind of done,
right?
It doesn't need to change all that much very often. Maybe there's a new programming language version that maybe it needs to get updated every once in a while. So I've seen people dismiss things. I'm like, well, no one's touched it in 2 years. And I'm like, but it runs, right? And
it kind of depends on the package, right? Like if it's quote unquote like feature complete. I mean, I'm of the opinion that software is never truly finished. Some people disagree with that, but I think you should continue to refine your software over time, and other people can disagree with me on that. But
when you're starting something new, or say cleaning something up, how do you approach designing software so that it remains understandable and adaptable as it evolves?
Right. So a lot of that comes down to that initial scaffolding structure, making sure things are kind of like idiomatically named, and someone new to the project can quickly look at it from a high level and be like, okay, I know where things should fit. I know where I should place my feature. And if it's not that transparent upon first look, then you might want to kind of like reconsider how you're structuring the program.
Are there any, say, cultural habits or review practices that you think make a big difference in keeping your team aligned around what simplicity means to them? Because you might have as an individual perspective on that, but how do you think about that from like a team dynamics perspective?
So we are big proponents of writing RFCs for like larger features. If you're just knocking out like a bug ticket, we don't really do it. But if it's for a significant feature, we encourage our engineers to write an RFC so they really think about the problem before they even write any code, right? Like this is like how I'm going to approach from a high level of how I build this feature, and these are the supporting community packages I plan on using. What does the team think? And then we'll like asynchronously kind of like talk about it and leave comments on the RFC, and then like come together to kind of discuss it as a team.
Do you have like a template for what like your team, like an RFC template that you kind of work on? Like it needs to be at least this substantial.
Yeah, we have a structure for it, like question, answer, solution, things like the alternative solutions. That's the basic kind of format.
How often is that happening in a team of, was that 11 engineers or so?
Yeah, I mean, we have 1 to 2 a month probably.
Okay. And the typical turnaround on those is?
We usually set the timeline to a week, but usually it doesn't take that long. We only set it to a week, so like there's a hard stop on it, so it doesn't just sit out there.
I see. And then if at that point, what does that process look like then once so for everybody listening, what does RFC stand for? Just so we're not.
It's a request for comment, right? Okay. So you come up with your solution, what you see the problem as, and then your potential solution, right? And we communicate a lot we use Discord internally. So RFCs are not intended to be blocking, but we will comment on Discord. We'll comment on the RFC itself. We store these in like Confluence. Okay. And then if it warrants like a further like group discussion because there's too much back and forth, then we'll actually talk about it like in our weekly dev meeting.
I see.
So we have like our meetings are kind of like we have like our daily stand-ups that we do, and then we have like a weekly engineering meeting where the whole team comes together for an hour and we talk about stuff.
I like that. How do you go about coaching your engineers to make code that's easy to, let's say, reason about?
Easy to reason about. As far as like how they're like structuring their like naming things, or
I think for other people coming in, it's like, well, how do you bake that down into like, is it simple to kind of understand, to grok, what have you?
Okay. I mean, so from like a functional perspective, we have certain naming conventions we like to follow, like with, nouns and verbs and things like that, and just making that consistent. So when you're in one section of the app, it doesn't feel like totally different than where somebody else worked in the app. So keeping that naming consistent is a big help. I'm a big encourager of documentation, but the documentation shouldn't just be repeating like the interface and the function names, but it should actually add context that's not really apparent in the code itself. That I think that is the purpose of good code documentation, I believe.
So you try to encourage a lot of that to happen within the code base, or do you reference a lot of things elsewhere in your Git commits or linking back to some ticket?
Yeah, all kind of works together. So like our Jira tickets it's like that's going to describe the problem we're trying to solve, and we reference that in our code commits. But any outside context to the actual functioning of the code itself that is not in the code, we put that into documentation.
Sure.
Right? Something that it would be like you'd need external context around that's not really like apparent from the code.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I know that you've worked in both strongly typed and dynamically typed languages. How has that shaped how you think about software maintainability?
Sure. So my background, I did write a lot of code in dynamically typed languages earlier on in my career. Currently, I'm a fan of strongly typed languages. I feel like the benefits you get by embracing typing kind of outweigh the additional work that's required around it. Like, function signatures are way more useful, and things like the type checker yelling at you, like it'll help you from kind of making footguns throughout your code that would have happened with dynamic typing. I know it's like there's kind of like a push and pull in the community around that, because some people enjoy the freedom and the speed of dynamic typing, but I think long term it kind of makes us you're gonna have more of a mess to deal with as far as maintaining the software.
Do you feel like that transition for you? What do you feel? Do you feel like you remember when it kind of clicked in your brain, like, oh, I see how this is benefiting me, or did it feel for a little while like there was? Did you feel like there was like a period of time where you're like, this feels like a little bit of extra ceremony in the process, or?
Yeah, so I mean, I've written in a lot of languages over the years. So like I wrote a lot of PHP for a while, and then I went to writing a lot of JavaScript, and then eventually writing TypeScript. And now I pretty much write Rust code all day long.
Okay.
And then that progression is kind of what led me down this, like, I would say, enlightenment of liking strongly typed languages. Just that, like, the power you get with things like enums and Rust are really convenient. And even I still go back and write TypeScript, but like it's not really the same. Like you get some of the benefits as far as like the IDE completions and whatnot go, but
Sure.
They don't have like the strong enum support like you get in Rust.
We'll be back with Don in just a moment. Hi, it's me, Robby. I want to take a quick moment to say thank you for making time to listen to Maintainable. If you're finding these conversations valuable, please consider sharing a link amongst your peers and or writing a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Also, do you know someone in our industry who you think I should have on the podcast? Shoot me an email to Robby with a Y at maintainable.fm. And now, let's get back to our interview with Don MacKinnon. So for someone that hasn't done much work in types myself, but I'm curious, do you feel like types change how your team communicates or structures their code?
It can, yeah, because you start to think about things and how pieces of information can be encapsulated within a type, right? And it's more of an organizational view, I think, of your code when you start embracing types, right? And I think it leads to kind of a cleaner separation of responsibilities within your code.
What about when it comes to things like automated testing? Does that feel like it's shifted that mindset at all for you?
I think it makes automated testing like much cleaner, because you can test. You have with types, you have like a really strong contract of what is expected, right? And so like it's really easy to write a test around that. Whereas the behavior, if the behavior is more fluid because you're not sure of what's coming in and out, then it's harder to account for.
I can see how that would potentially be a lot more helpful there. Now, I know you've also written quite a bit about improving trust in AI systems. So first of all, for our listeners, what does trust mean to you in that context?
Trust means to me that given a prompt asking like an LLM system, you're going to get repeatable results back, right? Repeatable results back with few hallucinations or no hallucinations and actual correct information. Part of the problem with information correctness is there could be a lack of data inputs to that model, right? Particularly if you're asking it a question that wasn't inside the training data itself, right? So a lot of people have built RAG systems to kind of accommodate for that. But I think that's kind of a half measure. Down the road, giving tools to LLMs to be able to retrieve real-time information themselves, I think is going to be more of a long-term solution. And so certain ways you can improve that is by connecting more APIs to these language models through tools like MCP or whatnot. If you connect it to like a suite of MCP tools, then it can enhance its capabilities essentially.
Interesting. Are you using much AI at Searchcraft with your product at this point?
So we built an MCP server. Mostly at first it was for us to use internally just to speed our own development up. And then we decided, hey, this is pretty cool. We'll make it publicly available. And we noticed a lot of people started using it. So now we're focusing on adding additional tools within our MCP server to help other developers using our platform.
Interesting. And so what sort of use cases are you seeing in that? Like, is it helping them just with their code, or is it helping them just integrate with your platform? A bit of both?
Well, the interesting thing is you connect it up to like Claude or whatever, then you can you can have conversations around the code itself, around the APIs, rather than having to necessarily go and read documentation about like, okay, how do I construct this query, or what endpoint do I use to do this XYZ, right? You can just kind of tell it what you're wanting to do, and then it has knowledge of what's available and can format that for you.
I can see that being pretty helpful, and very going back to the trying to build a platform that is very developer friendly. That sounds like that's kind of in line with that. Do you foresee this being something that a lot of other organizations with SDKs, public APIs that or APIs that they're providing, or endpoints that their customers using, should probably be taking advantage of tools like this?
I definitely think so. I think it's going to be kind of table stakes for any developer tool, because you should really be enabling developers of all types and backgrounds and capabilities, and not prescribing one way to work, right? So however they choose to work with your APIs, you should encourage that. And MCP is kind of like one other path for them to use use your platform.
Interesting. I don't know a ton about what that infrastructure looks like on like a local development environment at this point. I'm curious, like if your software project is connecting to, say, something like Searchcraft and three different ones, and they all provide me an MCP, but I have a team of 20 of us on our team all working with that. Is that kind of currently requiring all 20 of us to set up 1 to 3 things ourselves individually, or is that something that can be deployed out to your team kind of like in a simple way? So like this is just part of the bundle of how we're working together. Are we there yet?
Yeah, I mean, you can bundle it just like any development environment, right? So if you wanted to make a container that had all of your tools for local development in it, you could do that.
Oh,
And
interesting.
then you could all they would have to do is connect to that container, and they would have knowledge of all those tools.
Interesting. Okay. So that could be the containers being like maybe if you're using Docker or something locally or something,
Yeah.
or okay.
Yeah, that's probably the most straightforward way of doing it.
And no, that's helpful. I'll do a little bit more investigation on this. Admittedly, I've been kind of like a little skittish of getting too far in the weeds in AI on this podcast for the lot, but I feel like that's definitely shifting. Are you finding other ways that using LLMs and AI has been helpful to navigate existing older code bases, or other people's code bases that maybe your project's relying on?
Yeah, it is really good for asking questions about it. It kind of like back in the day, we'd go to Stack Overflow to ask all of our questions, right? Now it's kind of like you have that power located locally on your computer to ask questions that don't exist yet. So you can pull down a package, have it indexed through the LLM, and then ask like, what is the general structure of this code? What is this doing here? And it's a great companion to work alongside.
If there's anyone listening that's not spent too much time experimenting with this, was there like a small exercise you could recommend that they spend an hour or two in the next couple of days to go experiment with this?
So there are a couple of like web-based like AI playgrounds where you can actually pull in different MCP servers. Glamma comes to mind, Glamma.ai. I don't have any affiliation with them. I just found out about them not too long ago. There's also some great like MCP. There's a MCP subreddit. There's a couple of Discord groups that I'm in. I just see like what people are building.
Nice. Okay. I'll definitely include some links to those for everybody in the show notes as well. That's helpful. Thanks for digging into that with me. So for teams listening who might feel stuck with, say, an aging or overly complex system, what are a few small things that they could start doing today, in your opinion, Don, to make their software a little bit more maintainable?
Right. So I'm a big fan of this architecture pattern called the Strangler. It sounds horrible, but what it does is for like, let's say an API, for example, you kind of rewrite one endpoint at a time. And as long as the request and response contracts match up, it's a good way to replace your software over time.
Yeah, that's the Strangler. Is it the Strangler fig pattern or the Strangler? Yeah, I think I've heard that interchanged a couple times, but yeah, I definitely include links to that as well. I think you can probably find that on that. What is it? The Blicky? What was it called? The wiki, the C2 wiki. I think it's maybe on there, or maybe is it? I can't remember if that was a Martin Fowler or it's in that realm of people.
That sounds right.
Yeah. What's one low risk habit or practice that tends to have an outsized impact over time?
I would say making sure you set aside time every day for what I would refer to as deep work. So that's time where you're not checking your messages, you're not checking email, you're not tackling other things, but you're dedicating a block to deep thinking time and going deep on a bigger problem. A lot of times as developers, we pull something off the stack that's like the quickest or the easiest because we're avoiding like the bigger problem. But spending that time to focus and go deep on a problem lets you put in the effort to make sure you're like doing it the way that it should be done rather than kind of just trying to speed run through it or whatever.
Now, for like people listening and might be thinking about that, like just some context, is it just, do you see it as like an amount of time? Like, hey, try to spend at least an hour, 2 hours just focused on some deeper work, or because a lot of our work can sometimes be reactive in a way to like what things are going, or, if we're trying to be asynchronous as an organization, there could be things in, you mentioned that your team uses Discord, Slack, what have you, or things in Jira, notifications, waiting for someone to reply to you. How do you kind of go about prepping yourselves to have space to do that type of deep work without feeling distracted in the moment? And maybe your role is maybe a little bit different than maybe like another engineer that's not saying, air quoting, just part of the team, but maybe not overseeing and mentoring people, or and trying to keep people focused on moving the projects forward.
I mean, I would say the kind of the higher up you are in the organization, the more difficult it becomes because there's a lot of people depending upon you or messaging you with questions, or you're getting pulled into meetings. I personally like to block off time on my calendar where I know people can't slot in meeting times with me during that time. Can't always do that, but that's what I like to do. And then I'll like put on like do not disturb on my messages for a little bit. Doesn't help for people actually physically coming over and talking to you, but
no,
it reduces it a little bit. Yeah.
So I'm curious if when your team is working on trying to improve something in your software, let's say maybe maintainability is maybe too broad of a thing, but like you're trying to improve you have some metric that you're trying to like, oh, we want to make our deployments faster. Or we need to improve our test speed, or we need to just add more test coverage. Maybe it's something more broader like that, where it's a little less, but are there things that I feel like there's a lot of teams that people will say like, well, I raised concerns about us having a slow test suite, or we have some flaky test, what have you. And it doesn't feel like things are getting better, but you might, Don, feel like the team is making progress. So here's some ways that we can kind of talk about it so that everybody kind of gets on the same page, that we are making some momentum together. Are there any strategies? Because I feel like I do talk to teams who are like, we're making things better, but there's people on the team that don't feel like it's a lot better than it used to be.
I mean, improvement, a lot of times you can quantify it, right? Like, is it like, okay, build times are going down versus going up, or test run times are going down versus up, or we're increasing the amount of tests. So those are all things you can measure, and anything you can measure, you can, trend on improvement, right? So you can kind of graph it out. But being able to measure something ahead is like kind of key to knowing if you're having impact or not. Sometimes it's a little more ephemeral, like, do I feel better about the code? But yeah, I think measurement is important.
How do you personally decide what's, air quoting again, good enough when it comes to seeing those improvements?
Yeah, I mean, you can go far down the rabbit hole of like, I'm trying to get 0.01% more improvement, right? But at a certain point, you're putting far more effort in it than you're getting out of it. I like to say, does this actually is this a user impacting improvement? Is this a business impacting improvement? And those things are a higher priority than like, okay, well, this is a pain problem just for one person, right? Like, okay, maybe a slow compile time, while annoying, may not actually impact the product itself as far as it's consumed. So that's probably a lower priority issue than like something that's user impacting.
And it'll just be faster when we get the next round of new laptops, right?
Yeah, totally.
Are there any areas of software development where you feel like you've had strong opinions that have drastically changed as you've progressed in your career?
Well, back before I wrote TypeScript, I was against it because I was like, oh, this is not even a real language. It's just, is this like CoffeeScript all over again? And then getting to work with it, I did end up like changing my mind about that. Like, yeah, okay, I like the flexibility of being able to build quickly, which is vanilla JavaScript, but all the advantages that I talked about previously about what you get with typing, I think outweigh that. And so I turned my way around on that and became more of a fan of it.
Are there other trends that you feel like have been popping up that you find yourself being a little more skeptical about?
Well, the software engineering community comes and goes in like cycles, right? So there's this shift on the web now to getting everything to be rendered server side versus like everything doing it all client side. And I think we probably went too far on the like SPA apps and then client side rendering and all that. Now there's like a pushback on that, but that's also where we were before we went down that road. I think that what we gained along the way was like the component based development kind of paradigm, which was not as widespread before things like React and Angular and Vue and those technologies. But now there's this kind of hard shift back towards server side, which is kind of interesting. But I'm also like, we've done this cycle a couple times already.
Do you feel like having been around and seeing these cycles that you find yourself feeling like I'm just going to wait this out, or do you feel like you can kind of jump in and be like, whoa. How are you kind of navigating that?
I think we as engineers sometimes like to try out the new shiny thing, the new toy a little too often. So I'm kind of waiting to see how it plays out in this particular area.
Hey folks, it's Robby here. Just want to take a moment to tell you about my company, Planet Argon. Let me tell you about Planet Argon. Once again, that's Planet Argon. You know, like argon, the noble gas, like neon and xenon. But argon, Planet Argon. What do you want to know about Planet Argon? Well, we're Planet Argon. Have you ever been to planetargon.com? You can learn more about my company, Planet Argon, if you head over to planetargon.com. That's right, that's planetargon.com, where you can learn all about planetargon.com, Planet Argon. Thanks again. This is Robby from Planet Argon. I'm curious, given your team's working on a new product and get that shipped and you're working on the features and functionality for customers, how do you also give your team members some space to experiment with like new things, knowing that you may not as an organization be chasing all the new shiny things, but still be able to think about people's professional development and getting to experiment a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's side projects you can do. I mean, there's like little POCs you can spin up. We do like to try new tech. That's kind of where our whole MCP server came out of, was somebody on the team took the initiative to spin it up for himself. Right. So it wasn't something I asked for. Somebody on the team built it. And then we all came to see how like he presented it during one of our weekly meetings. And we're like, oh, wow, this is actually really cool. So we have like little moments like that all the time where somebody will build something on their own just to try something out and then present it to the team. And we take a look at it. Out
of curiosity, are those things that people ask for time to do? Or is that just things that they kind of squeeze time and curious enough to go figure it out and they come and present it at that point in time?
Yeah, they usually just squeeze it in at some point.
I'm just always curious, like if they had come to you and said, hey, I have this idea, I want to experiment with this thing, do you think you would have approved it?
Yeah, okay, so there have been times where people have done that, and I'm like, okay, sure, go ahead. We'll just time box it. Like, obviously, you can't spend like a month on this thing, but, whatever. We'll time box it this amount of time and then work it out.
The reason I was curious about that is because I have personally found myself, because we've worked on a lot of work in consulting space, and there's always kind of like this little chattering of like, wouldn't it be great if we built our own product one day and we wouldn't have to have clients anymore? I'm like, well, you still have to find customers, and there's a whole market and sell the thing. It's not like we can just build it and people are going to come. I understand that part of it, but sometimes some people on the team will propose like, hey, I want to build this thing. I want to experiment with something. And I'm like, I wish you kind of had just done it a little bit and then presented it if you got somewhere with it. And I didn't notice that you weren't productive on the other client work that we're doing. Because when you come to me with like, I want to build this thing, and immediately I'm like, well, how much is it going to cost? How much time? When are we going to squeeze it in? And those are a lot of decisions for me to make. So I'm just curious, like if you have had to encounter that much yourself in this role that you're in, to be like, how do you balance that so that people can have some enough autonomy? Because it's easier I'm always like, well, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than, because there's also like a lot of times where I've given the thumbs up to a project, and then like 6 months later, I'm like, whatever happened? Like, well, I kind of fizzled off and I lost interest in it. I'm like, oh, well, I thought we made space for you to do that, but that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It really depends on like the ebbs and flows of how much contract work you have, and do you have the capacity to take some time away from that billable hours, right? Yeah. It's a balance. For me, it's like our consulting agency was never that big. I think at the top height of our employee headcount was like 14 people. So we had to be really careful about like where people spend time that's not billable.
Yeah, we're not that much bigger than that ourselves. So I get that. Anyhow, it's just something I've been thinking, ruminating about a little bit here. And if any of them are listening, now you understand. I think about these things
Yeah, I
all the
mean,
time.
ideally, I would love. I'm of the mindset I would love to give people like a percentage weekly time
Mm.
XY where they could just like build whatever they wanted to build. Didn't even need to serve a business purpose, but we were never of the size that we could like effectively do that.
At this point in time, if you think like say 12 months from now, if there's one thing that you would like to see of your team or like how your team has improved themselves, how would you describe that?
So I'm a big fan of continual learning, continual education. Of people like should always be looking to take on new skills and keeping on top of trends, right? Because that's especially with client work or even with building a developer tool, you need to know like what people in the community are using and where the industry is shifting towards. So usually I like to set goals in our one-on-ones of like, okay, well, where's a gap in your skill set that you want to get stronger at? Sometimes it's like I'm really good at front end, but I don't know back end at all, right? So we'll set a goal like, okay, well, maybe you need to deliver like design a database schema on a project this quarter and do that yourself and you kind of own that. Or I am bad about writing unit tests, right? So we'll make a quantifiable goal of like, okay, well, on these projects going forward, you're going to learn how to write tests with vtest and implement that everywhere throughout the code. Yeah, we'll set goals in our one-on-ones and kind of measure how far we got. Sometimes we don't quite get there, and that's fine. But we see what progress we made.
Are you using any sort of like a developer experience metrics tracking tools or anything at this point? Getting a sentiment on a periodic basis to measure those, anything?
Not really, but if you have anything you'd recommend, I'd love to hear about it.
No, it's something that our team's always kind of, we definitely use a bunch of different tools over here. I can definitely send over some recommendations from our
Okay.
engineering manager after we hop off this, but it's something that we're always trying to contextualize because like, well, a lot of those tools are built for product teams because most, and so they're working on similar code bases and they have shared experiences. But when we try to use tools like that for, say, a team of people that are working on different clients, different code bases, there's a lot of like caveats and like, well, there's asterisks on every single number. Like, well, this got really skewed because they got this one client came to us with very, very little test coverage. So yeah, everybody's concerned about test coverage this quarter. But a quarter ago was a completely different type set of clients. So it's kind of harder to look at that data in the same sort of way that you could maybe at a product company.
Right.
The joys of consulting. All right, Don. So a couple of quick last questions for you. Where can listeners best follow your thoughts and ruminations about software engineering online?
I post a lot on LinkedIn. I also post a lot on Blue Sky. So those are kind of the two
Okay.
places that I post more short form things or links to videos that I'm making. I do have like a blog on like Medium and DevTube, but I don't particularly update that very often.
Okay.
I've kind of gotten away from the longer form blogging, but maybe at some point I'll get back to it or whatever. But
Sure,
mostly
sure.
like LinkedIn and Blue Sky.
Okay.
And all of those links are on my personal site, donmckinnon.dev.
Wonderful. Don, I'm curious, is there a non-technical, non-software book that you find yourself recommending to peers?
I've been really into this series of books currently. It's called the Aubrey Maturin book series. It's about it's like Napoleonic era naval combat, Napoleonic War era
All right.
books. It's written by an author called Patrick O'Brien, and there's I believe 20 books in the series. I'm about halfway through it.
Oh, wow.
Um,
And this
so
is this fiction?
it's fiction. So, but the fictional characters kind of they encounter events that actually happened
Hmm.
during the Napoleonic War. So like they'll be in a naval battle that other ships were there, or they'll encounter characters that are actually real people kind of thing. So the author, I think, had a very strong history background. So he knew like how to insert the characters into these events.
Interesting. Nice. Okay. I'll definitely include links to that in the show notes since it was about, you said almost 20 books in that series or approximately.
Right. I believe there's a 21st one that was like an unfinished book that got
Okay.
released that was only like 3 chapters, but the core books are like, there's 20 of them, I believe.
Interesting. And then you said it was Patrick O'Brien, right?
Patrick O'Brien. Yep.
All right. I'll definitely include links to that. And out of curiosity, do you remember how you got introduced to that? Is this you kind of a history person or?
I am a history person. If you ever seen the movie Master and Commander with what's that guy's name? Russell Crowe. He was in it.
Yes.
That's based on like a couple of books that they kind of like amalgamated for the script.
Oh, I see. And that's also Patrick O'Brien as well.
Yep.
Okay. And that was the Captain Jack Aubrey, right? Okay. Looking that up right here over here on the story graph, friend of the podcast. All right, Don. Well, I'll definitely include links to the book and to your website and LinkedIn and Blue Sky, et cetera, in the show notes for everybody. And with that, thank you so much for stopping by to talk shop with us on Maintainable.
Thank you. It was a great time. I really enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure. You've been listening to Maintainable, a Planet Argon production. Editing by Claudia Armbruster. Post-production by Autumn Morgan and Ellis Fenson. Emotional support from the letter M. For Maintainable, for momentum, for making things better. If this episode resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Keep showing up. See you next time. Maintainable.